You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, bringing you the latest news, position analysis, and more. Here's your hosts, Matt Jones and Scotty Bordelon.
Arkansas hits the field again Saturday night with a 6 o'clock kickoff against Missouri State at Razorback Stadium. It's a top 10 matchup of sorts. The Razorbacks are number 10 in the AP top 25. Missouri State ranked number 5 in the football championship subdivision. Both teams are 2-0, although against much different competition. The Razorbacks with wins over Cincinnati and South Carolina. Missouri has defeated Central Arkansas and Tennessee Martin. Matt Jones with Tom Murphy of the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette and Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph of WholeHogSports.com. And of course, the story this week is Bobby Petrino's return back in Fayetteville for the first time, I guess, since 2012, whenever he was fired as Arkansas's head coach. Tom, you went up to Springfield earlier this week and had a chance to talk with him for a few minutes. Just kind of what's the sense that you get from Bobby about coming back?
Yeah, knowing him as I do from covering him those years, I felt that he wouldn't be real explicit about his time at Arkansas because it's game week, and that's the way I led my story. And when asked about what it means to him, would he be emotional and all that, he just said it's about being prepared and all that. But fortunately, when it was over, I got a few extra minutes, and he did talk about what it meant to him. And he's been bumping into guys who've joined the coaching profession, like, Casey Dick and Ryan Mallett and DeAnthony Curtis and Joe Adams. And, he's a complicated legacy in that Arkansas fans knew he was a great X's and O's guy, and he made players better, but the way he did it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. I mean, there are people who've been on the record saying they would not have signed with the Razorbacks coming out had he still been the coach. And I think you saw in the story by Chris Lowe on ESPN.com this week that Tyler Wilson said, not the guy you'd go to if you needed to talk to him for, a personal issue or something. So he's a great X and O's guy, and I'm sure he's going to cause Arkansas some defensive wrinkles. I think it's a tremendous matchup between Petrino and his schemes, the way he gets guys open, the way he can exploit the middle, versus Barry Odom and the pressure he wants to try to get and how often he'll leave guys in man. And we're going to see adjustments throughout the game.
We've seen teams attack Missouri State this year with what I call the Barry Odom special, which is rush 3, drop 8. And I kind of think, Scotty, that's probably what we're going to see quite a bit on Saturday night, given the problems that Arkansas has had defending the pass a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. And, if Arkansas is just putting 3 defensive linemen on the field, they should have pretty fresh bodies, I would think. I think they've played, if you throw Dorian Gerald into that mix, I think he's gotten a little bit over 20 snaps this season. Hasn't graded super well, but he's another body you could put in there. I think you probably feel comfortable with 9 guys. So you got 3 fleets of 3 guys that you can throw in there, and you can keep some pretty fresh bodies going at Missouri State's offensive line and try to, knock Jason Shelley off his spot a little bit. I think one of the more interesting matchups potentially this weekend is Dwight McGlothern, who's got a couple picks in his first 2 games. And, he's a guy that's really intrigued me because he brings a sort of flair and swagger and confidence to the cornerback position that I think Arkansas has kind of missed in the past. And he's got all the reasons in the world right now to be confident. I mean, he's got 2 picks against 2 pretty good teams and, a couple pretty good quarterbacks and just playing pretty well. And then on the other side of the ball from McGlothern potentially is Ty Scott, who I think is, he's top 5 and in the FCS, I believe in receiving yards. And he's a really, really explosive playmaker, graded out really well on Pro Football Focus through the first couple of weeks. He's a dangerous guy. And I think that's going to be super interesting to watch, just to see that matchup potentially. And this might be the week that Arkansas secondary is going to get, I don't know, maybe tested more than any other week. But I just think the quick throws, the hot passes to the boundary, screen game, I think they're really going to get tested there. So it's going to be of the utmost importance for Arkansas to not only be able to tackle in traffic, but tackle in open space.
One of the things I think that's really interesting this week, and really I think is the key to the game, more than anything else, is the line play. I mean, I just get the feeling that Arkansas is going to be able to push Missouri State around up front. They did it to South Carolina. They did it to an extent against Cincinnati. And with A&M coming up the next week, I don't think we're going to want to, or I don't think that Kendall Briles is going to want to have a whole lot of his offense exploited, so to speak, before they go to Arlington. And I think that there's probably some thought, Andrew, that they could push Missouri State around up front and win this game predominantly by running the football.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There's just a shortage of 330 plus guys with quick feet that can move people off the line of scrimmage like they have at Arkansas. And there's just not enough to go around, especially at an FCS school like Missouri State. And so I think that they're probably just, like you said, going to ground and pound until they can prove that they stop it, which I don't know that they will. And then on the opposite side of that, I think still in the trenches, Arkansas's D line should probably be able to get a solid push against Missouri State's offensive line. And Missouri State, I think, is going to have a hard time running the ball because I don't think they're going to be able to move that defensive line very far, if at all. And so I think they're going to have to throw the ball. And like Scotty said, that Arkansas secondary could be put to the test just because of how well I've heard you guys talk about Bobby Petrino and his schematics. And Arkansas secondary is a little banged up, so they'll have some depth pieces being challenged this week. And I guess that's where I could see Missouri State having a little success, but I do not see them having success running the ball or stopping Arkansas running the ball.
It was easier when it was Division 1A and 1AA, Tom.
I think what's really interesting about 2 games in is Arkansas has established what it wants to do. It wants to be very, very physical, and they've tackled hard. I mean, you look at the forced fumbles, the pressure they got on Spencer Rattler last week. Now, admittedly, South Carolina did a pretty good job at running some deep routes, getting some underneath stuff and guys breaking free, the 62-yard touchdown and some other plays. But on the offensive side of the ball, they just want to maul you. And although I think they're going to get theirs on the ground, I also believe this is a good week to try to get KJ a little bit more work on deep throws, because you're going to need to have that. Think back to the A&M game last year, how big the 87-yard or 83-yard touchdown to Traylon Burks was in the first quarter. It gave them a 10-0 lead. I mean, you got to be able to do that kind of thing. And I think they'll throw a couple deep ones to Landers and other guys, Keytron, some other guys.
Yeah, Scotty and I were talking about this earlier in the week. Who's going to be the guy that gets over the top deep? And it really feels, Scotty, like this could be the game where Landers is able to use that speed and that breakaway ability that we saw at Toledo last year.
Yeah, he was dynamic at Toledo last year. I think he averaged over 25 yards a catch, which is just kind of unheard of, on as many grabs as he had. He's a definite deep ball threat. And I wrote my Friday feature on him this week and got a comment that, like, wasn't he the one that dropped a deep ball last week? Like, yes, receivers drop passes. That happens, but the good receivers, put it behind them and keep catching balls. And he's a prime candidate to catch a ball, deep downfield. I think KJ to this point is, 3 of 6 on throws, 15 plus yards downfield. He was averaging about 6 or 7 throws of that kind last year, but a little bit different when you got a bona fide pro, of Traylon Burks caliber, on the perimeter for you. Don't quite have that at your disposal this year, but I think you've got more guys that can go out and consistently make plays. I think Landers is a prime candidate. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to do that or go to him, deep down the field, exploit that elite easy speed early in the game. And I think if there's a dark horse candidate, it might be Warren Thompson, right? Like, I remember we saw that last year, I think in a pretty early game, might have been the Rice game or Georgia Southern, one of the two. He's pretty good at doing that. He's another big body, 6'3" or 6'4", really good speed too. He's a down the field threat. I think those are the top 2 options if I had to put my money on it. So yeah, I think this week we'll see KJ probably run the ball a little bit less and, maybe try some of those intermediate to deep ball throws with a little bit more frequency than we've seen the first 2 weeks.
There's a lot of focus on Arkansas's players this week, but, Missouri State's got one of the real dynamic offensive players in FCS, and their quarterback, Jason Shelley. This is the Missouri Valley Conference Player of the Year last year. Missouri Valley Conference is a pretty good football conference. That's the conference that has North Dakota State, which is, kind of like the Alabama of FCS, wins the national championship, it feels like, every year. Shelley was 10th, I think, last year in the Walter Payton Award voting. That's for FCS Offensive Player of the Year. That's the award Cole Kelly won a couple of years ago, and I think he was second last year in that award voting. Dual threat, but he can throw. Played at Utah at the beginning of his career, went to Utah State, and now he's really flourished at Missouri State. Let's start with Tom. Just the dual threat nature of Shelley and how you think Arkansas might try to contain him.
Well, you're right. He does have that. And Sam Pittman does not want him out of the pocket. And he can run. His running numbers this year aren't great. He's got a touchdown. I think they're only rushing touchdown. But and he's a very confident guy. After I talked to Bobby Petrino outside the Plaster Stadium interview room, I went back in. He was at the interview table with the running back, the transfer from Kansas State. And I was a little bit surprised. He's not a big guy. I mean, when you're used to seeing KJ Jefferson every week, when you see a guy who I think he's listed at 6 feet, maybe 200 and plus a little, but he just doesn't look that tall. But not to diminish him in any way, because the connection with Ty Scott is for real, and they're going to be very confident in their schemes. At a key moment in the game last week, they had a play call where they had several routes going to the right, and Shelley hand signaled to Scott, who was over on the left. It was a 4th down play. It was a key play, fourth quarter, and instead of running what the play was, Scott ran a route, and they got good protection over on the left side, and he completed a touchdown. So it just goes to show you that he's earned Petrino's trust in adjusting plays at the line of scrimmage. So certainly a dual threat weapon the Razorbacks will contend with.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. It'll be super interesting, like in the first couple series, just to see what Arkansas, what kind of looks they throw at him. I think he's such a different quarterback than the ones that Arkansas has faced in the first 2 weeks. Like, I think Spencer Rattler and Ben Bryant are both fairly mobile, but they're probably not. They don't have nearly the wheels that Shelley does. And I think last week Spencer Rattler had several opportunities where he could have, maybe taken 6, 7, 8-yard gains in the run game, but he is so maybe overly confident in the arm that he has, that his eyes just stayed downfield looking for receivers rather than picking up the yardage that was available in those run lanes that are open. When Arkansas drops as many defensive backs and linebackers too, those run lanes I think are potentially going to be open for Shelley, and I think he's the caliber of athlete that he's going to see that green grass in front of him, and he's going to try to make a guy miss, and if he does that, he can pick up 10, 12, 14 yards. And that's the kind of thing Arkansas, I think, has got to eliminate, just those intermediate type runs from the quarterback. When they've got things bottled up, down the field in terms of receivers that Shelley could potentially target, they've just got to eliminate that, I think, or that could cause Arkansas a lot of headaches. So I think Drew Sanders is a guy that, he's got really good speed for a linebacker who can cover pretty much sideline to sideline. I saw that last week. I think he's going to be a guy that might kind of be a spy on Shelley, just because I think he's probably Arkansas's most athletic linebacker. I wouldn't be surprised if they sometimes went with a 3-3, 3-3-5 look, just to maybe get a spy on the field at the linebacker position, just to keep Shelley at bay.
Yeah, I don't think the Arkansas defense should be surprised by any of the challenges that are presented by facing a dual threat quarterback, just because they have to contend with KJ Jefferson and Malik Hornsby every day in practice. And to me, those are two of the most athletic quarterbacks in the country. And to Scotty's point about Drew Sanders being a spy, I think that's probably a great idea for them. And I remember watching in the fastball start, Drew Sanders was spying on a play where Malik Hornsby was in at quarterback and couldn't find anyone downfield, so he took off, and Drew Sanders matched him stride for stride down the sideline and got him before he could reach the line of scrimmage. And so that kind of athleticism is probably something Missouri State's never seen before out of a linebacker. So I would assume that he would be a good person to assume that role.
Tom, we kind of talked about this earlier in the week on our earlier podcast, and it's about the intimidation factor. A lot of times FCS teams they'll lose the game before they even step off the bus just because they're overwhelmed by maybe the size of the crowd. Obviously, if they go up against an SEC team or say like a big time team from another Power 5 conference, there's a lot of times a size discrepancy between the players that they're lining up against on that day versus what they line up against most weeks. I don't know if it's going to be that way with Missouri State for a few reasons. Number one, the Petrino angle. The veteran coached at every level. He's going to know how to get his team ready. They've gone into OU. They've gone into Stillwater. They played well against Oklahoma State last year, kind of took them down to the wire. And then I think it's kind of interesting the transfer angle. We talked about Shelley came from Utah. They got players from all over: Kansas State, Florida State, Boise State. They've got a player on their roster who began at Alabama. They got a player who's been at Mississippi State. So these are guys, there are a lot of guys on the team who have been in those types of environment. I don't know. It's not to say that Arkansas won't overwhelm them with talent, but I don't know that Arkansas's stadium, the size discrepancy, anything like that's going to intimidate these Missouri State players as much as it might a typical FCS team.
Well, I think you bring up a good point. If there's a crowd of 70,000 plus some, and if it gets up to 71,000, it will be the biggest crowd to ever witness a Missouri State football game, because the previous record was the 2011 game in Fayetteville, which was a 51-7 rout. But I do believe the veteran presence will allow them to keep their heads about them a little more. Bobby Petrino actually specifically addressed this, and he used to talk about it some when he was at Arkansas as well. You rely on your training, your technique, and you don't. He says so many times in these big games where smaller schools go in, where they lose it is they lose their technique. They don't do what they're trained to do, and the play breaks down, and the other team gets all kind of openings. And then once it's happened, it can have a snowball effect on you. So I think they'll keep their wits about them. But here's what I point out in my matchups that are going to run on Saturday is Arkansas is big on both sides of the ball. So some of the licks they're going to be laying. You think back to Pooh-Paul's hit on, or it might have been Sanders' hit on Rattler. I mean, he threw a pass, it hit somebody, Rattler caught it, he got crushed by somebody, and he fumbled. South Carolina recovered the ball, but there were just so many hits in that game. And Jason Shelley and those guys, they've been hit before, but I'm not sure they've been hit to this level. And so I do think over time, Arkansas will just kind of wear Missouri State down. Even if they hit some big plays, I don't think they're capable of repeating it over and over and over in this game. And my final point, I'm kind of going a lot of different ways here, but I do think we're going to see a lot more drop 8 by Barry Odom, because they haven't shown it a lot this year, and it will make Missouri State have to adjust to that and make Jason Shelley be very precise and calculating in his reads. And if Arkansas doesn't get a lot of pressure out of that, then we'll see them adjust throughout the game.
Yeah, I think the intimidation factor comes in more on the field as opposed to, the environment that they're walking into. Those guys, some of those guys, went and played at Oklahoma State last year. Like Jason Shelley has played, at Utah before and has traveled to different places and experienced those environments. Jacardier Wright played in the Big 12. Like, he's seen what Texas and Baylor and, I think even on Monday he mentioned Iowa State as being kind of a hostile environment when the Cyclones are good. I think that stuff is kind of not going to really bother those guys much. Where the deer in the headlights look might come from is, when they run into Drew Sanders for the first time and he pops them, or Bumper Pool, or potentially with Jason Shelley, it might be one of Arkansas's defensive linemen hitting him in the mouth. I think that right there is where it's going to be. And then, on the defensive side, like Rocket Sanders or, KJ Jefferson delivering a lick, carrying the ball. I think that's where the intimidation factor is going to come in this week, more so than, the crowd, I think.
The fact that there's even we're talking about a big crowd for an FCS game, I think illustrates the Petrino effect on this game, because a lot of times these are the games where people don't show up for them. This is the game that's about the low interest game on the season ticket schedule. But Petrino's coming back, and I think you're probably the combination of that with Arkansas being in the top 10 for a while. There's an appreciation for this team. I think there's an eagerness to see them. It's going to make it to where I think this is going to be a tough ticket this week, and that the fact that I think, Tom, that we're even talking about there being a hostile environment for an FCS team tells you all you need to know about Petrino.
Oh yeah, it really does. And I don't know what the reception is going to be like. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of applause and warm welcome. And then there's also going to be signs and potentially some other stuff. But I just think it speaks to what Pittman has built here, and the fans. It's like he says he wants the fans to be able to stick their chest out and say, "I'm proud of my team," and that applies here. And there's never been a schedule like this at the University of Arkansas ever. That your week game is against the Bobby Petrino coach team, and then you got Hugh Freeze coming in with Liberty. Never been anything like this, and I think it will be indicative and reflective in what we see from the crowd.
The Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Kendall King. Kendall King is a retail execution company based in Bentonville. For more than 30 years, they've helped leading brands deliver creative POP solutions to their retail partners. Design, display, signage, KendallKing.com. That's KendalKing.com.
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today. WholeHogSports.com.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for Whole Hog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today.
Welcome back to the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
We hope to join us on September 21st, next Wednesday, for the Hogs Illustrated Sports Club. Maria Fossey, the LPGA star and the former NCAA champion golfer at the University of Arkansas, will be our speaker ahead of the Northwest Arkansas Championship at Pinnacle Country Club. But you can come listen to Maria Fossey speak at the Hilton Garden Inn in Fayetteville. For more details, nwadealpiggy.com. That's nwadealpiggy.com. Maria Fossey on September 21st at the Hogs Illustrated Sports Club. At the HI Sports Club this week, we had Casey Dick, the former Arkansas quarterback, and we had him there because we wanted to talk to him some about Bobby Petrino and what was it like to play for Bobby Petrino. And I thought, Scotty, you were there, you heard this too, the level of insight that he gave to playing quarterback for Petrino was just fascinating. He said that on the night before a game, Petrino would pass out a 6-inch ring binder to his quarterbacks, and it would be full of these still photo shots of defenses. And he would make the quarterbacks write down what the defense was and where the blitz was going to be coming from based on just that still shot. He said that Petrino put so much pressure on the quarterbacks during the games or during the practice week that when it came to the games, it felt like the games were easier than what they had seen in practice. And then, one of the things that I thought was really interesting listening to him, he said a lot of people ask him what to expect from Bobby Petrino. He said, watch the first drive. He's very meticulous, reads or watches film and reads the defenses so well that there's a lot of emphasis put on that first drive. And he feels like if they can score on the first drive, it really sets a good tone for the rest of the game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you pretty much covered the highlights of Casey. He was really, I thought, an engaging speaker earlier this week, and I really enjoyed it. Kind of a side note, I was senior in college and taking a profile or a feature writing class, and wasn't exactly sure what I was going to do in terms of that story. And then deadline was coming up and I was stressing out. And then, I found out Casey Dick was the offensive coordinator at Lakeside Junior High. And so I ended up going up and watching one of Casey Dick's games, and ended up talking to him on the phone and his mother for a profile. So I got to finally tell Casey thank you again. I think it was about 8 years later. But he was super insightful with Petrino. Said he was a guy that, compared to Houston Nutt, like Houston Nutt's door was always open to his office. If you ever needed to go sit down and talk with him just about ball or anything else, his door was always open. And Bobby was kind of the exact opposite. He was, just super, super football minded. What I thought it was super interesting that, just those still shots that, you would have to identify the coverage, who's blitzing on certain plays, and just the preparation that Bobby required from his quarterbacks was just, it sounded pretty extreme, pretty intense. I don't know if extreme is the right word, but very intense. And like you said, he made it a point to make practices so hard to the point that, on game days, things would kind of come second nature. So I think Casey definitely grew. I don't think he spent just a whole lot of time with Bobby, but the things that he learned from Bobby, like he still teaches now, probably some of the things, not obviously every bit of it, with his guys at Fayetteville now. And that's why he's had good quarterback success, Matt. I think that firsthand, covering them or calling their games. But yeah, Casey just took all the things that he learned from Bobby, football related, he's passing along to kids now. And, I think that's a terrific resource to have, as somebody that's played under an offensive mind like Bobby. And now you can pass that kind of thing down to younger kids, and hopefully it helps them in their own football career.
Tom, you and I saw this, I don't know how many times over those 4 years that we covered his practices, when they would come out of a huddle and they wouldn't clap correctly. And what a yell, get back in the huddle. There'd usually be another colorful word or two that was sprinkled in there. But I was asking Casey about that. He said that Bobby actually had clap sessions on the night before games and really took a lot of pride in those clap sessions. And what he believed was, if it started the clap when you were coming out of the huddle. If you couldn't get the clap right, how were you going to get the play right? It's such a meticulous level of detail. That's professional football type detail that's coming out of the coach, that I can't imagine there are very many FCS teams that have a coach with that level of detail. And it probably speaks to why Missouri State's made such a meteoric rise in that level.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Very, very fine detail. We would see some of their scrimmage work and the way they set up scrimmaging. And if defenders kind of freelanced and did something on their own, he would jump them. Man, he did not want the offense to be denied if the defense maybe kind of knew what was coming. So very, very interesting character. Certainly one of the more interesting coaches in college football the last quarter century.
It was interesting covering him at Arkansas. It's going to be interesting to see what the reception is going to be like. There's been all this talk about it. Are people going to boo, or they're going to be cheering? A lot of this has at a football stadium, you can kind of choreograph what's going to happen by what you show on the video boards. It's such a large place, when you run the teams out, all this kind of stuff. I just don't know that there's going to be this chance for you to see Bobby Petrino, a still shot of him on the, like a close-up shot on the screen, or that they're going to say his name over the loudspeaker. I can't remember any time when they've announced an opposing head coach's name over the loudspeaker at Arkansas. I just don't know that there's going to be this one big chance to give Bobby the reaction that you think that he deserves. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that goes on Saturday. Prediction time, several interesting games around the SEC this week. Of course, Arkansas playing Missouri State. We'll get to that here in just a moment, but we'll start with a non-conference game, a future SEC team. OU goes to Nebraska this week. Of course, Nebraska just fired Scott Frost. This is the back end of a home-and-home arrangement between these two teams. Obviously, it was a great Big 8 rivalry back in the day, Big 12 rivalry, even for a while in the late 90s, early 2000s. Tom, we'll start with you. Who you got?
OU in a route.
Yeah, I'm going to go the same direction. I think Nebraska minus Scott Frost is still a bad football team.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree. They weren't good before Scott Frost got there, and they're still not good after him.
I want to believe the fact that this game's in Lincoln and the fact that Nebraska is going to be trying to rally around their interim head coach means that they'll play better, and they might play better. But gosh, when you look at the way they played, because they played Northwestern on that first weekend and there weren't any other games on, I watched a lot of that when they didn't look good that day. I actually watched a little bit of their game against Georgia Southern the other night and didn't look well, or really didn't look good in that game either. I just think OU will go in there and win that one, so I'll pick OU too.
I think you're right on there. Like in terms of the energy in the stadium, I think it might be different. Kind of like, I don't know, fans might feel like kind of a weight has been lifted with Frost, off the sidelines now, but that doesn't change, anything in terms of the roster and your personnel. I think it's still got a long way to go.
Well, Nebraska had a lot of years where they still had this consecutive sellout streak going. I think it reached something like 300 and some odd games. So they go there and they support that team regardless of how they're playing. Mississippi State goes to Death Valley this week, Tom. You think Mike Leach can go in and pull off an upset for the second time in a row?
I do, and I actually picked him for the picks we're going to do, but I've been reconsidering that. I think LSU is going to have a really solid game plan. I think they do have good coaching there, and I'm going to stay with my Mississippi State pick because, go with your first instinct, but wouldn't be shocked at all if LSU wins this one in actually, decent fashion.
Yeah, I'm actually going with LSU in this game. I've been kind of impressed with the numbers that Jaden Daniels, their quarterback, has been putting up. He's another one of those dual threat quarterbacks that I think, Arkansas facing Jason Shelley this week is kind of a good thing for Arkansas. You see maybe a similar type player. I mean, he's completing almost 80% of his passes, got 5 touchdown passes, no picks, and he's rushed for over 130 yards, almost seven yards a pop. I think he's a pretty dangerous player. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what he can do against Mississippi State's defense.
I took Mississippi State in this one, although I kind of wavered on it for a little bit, but after watching the LSU Florida State game, I think that was on my mind when I made this pick, and they weren't convincing, and I think Mississippi State has a chance to be really good if they put it all together, but I mean, there's no telling if they will, but they have a chance.
What we don't know yet is how good is Florida State. They've only played 2 games. They beat LSU, obviously. They beat an FCS team in week 0. They had last week off. They'll play Louisville this week. I think Florida State might actually be a pretty good football team, and so I don't know that that's actually going to be as bad of a loss for LSU as maybe it looked in week 1, and they're going to be kicking themselves, no pun intended, for all the special teams problems that they had that game. I picked LSU for a couple of reasons. I think Brian Kelly will outcoach Mike Leach. I think he's a better coach. I think he's got a better coaching staff around him, and it's night in Death Valley. Big time difference, night in Baton Rouge versus night in Tucson, where Mississippi State was last week. So I think LSU will pull off the first big win of the Brian Kelly era. Penn State goes to Auburn on Saturday night. The Nittany Lions are ranked number 22. This was a great game up in Happy Valley last year. Of course, this is a huge game for Brian Harsin. He's probably the coach with the hottest seat now that Scott Frost is out of the picture. Tom, how do you see this going?
I'm rethinking my LSU Mississippi State pick, man. If it's not too late, man, I'm gonna get with you after. I might try to change that. I picked Penn State to win at Auburn. I liked kind of how they're a solid team with a little bit of explosiveness to them. I don't know yet what to think about Auburn, other than they're going to try to release Tank Bigsby. I'm not a big believer quite yet in Finley, so even though it's going to be tough to win on the road, I'm going to pick Penn State.
I went with Penn State just because, I liked what I saw out of them when they went to Purdue, I believe, to open the season. Purdue's another one of those places, kind of like Iowa State. When their team is really good, they've got a really electric atmosphere. And they went in there and just kind of battled back and won that game late. And I really like Joey Porter Jr., their cornerback. I think he's a guy, he's super long. I think he's projected to be, a top draft pick. Definitely, I think got first round potential. He's so long, And I think that he's going to help bottle up Auburn's pass game, maybe frustrate TJ Finley a little bit. I think it just comes – I've got Penn State winning this game. I think really if Penn State, contains Tank Bigsby to maybe, in that 80 to 100-yard range and don't let him, bust loose for anything more than that, I think Penn State will get out with a win.
Yeah, I also took Penn State. And like you guys have said, Tank Bigsby is kind of a one-man show on that Auburn offense, and he was held to 51 yards rushing against San Jose State, and Auburn struggled as a whole against San Jose State. And the last time I watched an SEC team struggle against San Jose State, it didn't end well. And so I'm going to go with Penn State.
I went back and forth on this, and I picked Auburn just because they're at home. I think that there's a lot of pressure on Brian Harsin right now, and I don't know. I kind of think that they might respond this weekend. There's also a rumor that they might pull out the orange jerseys, Jordan Hare, this weekend, and that seems to fire up the team whenever they're wearing those specialty uniforms sometimes. Don't know how I feel about Sean Clifford and James Franklin. It's like there's some consistency with them, but there's also so much inconsistency with Penn State over the last 2 or 3 years. And the fact they're going into an SEC environment, I just think that this is going to be a nice opportunity for Auburn to have a big game. I know the quarterback's different from whenever Alabama came in there last year, but people kind of forget that Alabama really was fortunate to get out of Auburn against a Brian Harsin coach team last year and win. And so I kind of think that maybe his coaching ability gets overlooked a little bit. I'm taking Auburn simply because they're the home game, and I don't trust Penn State. Not too far from Auburn, in Atlanta at Bobby Dodd Stadium, Georgia Tech's going to get its first big on-campus home game of the season. They played Clemson at Mercedes-Benz Stadium to start the year. Didn't look very good in it. This week, Tom, they'll have Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin coming into town. I figure there'll be plenty of Rebels that make that short drive over to Georgia.
Sure, there will be a lot of momentum for them. Still trying to figure out the QB situation between Altmaier and Dart. I think Altmaier got dinged up, so maybe we'll see a little bit more Dart. The Jeff Collins era at Georgia Tech, I would say, is on very, very shaky ground. And so I'm going to pick Ole Miss to win this game.
Yeah, I've got Ole Miss too, and I'm just, they've got, I think a lot of people, when they think about Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin, is just like they air the ball out a million times a game. They've got 2 guys right now that have rushed for over 180 yards, and they're not even, they're leaders in touchdown runs. So I think the run game is going to come in pretty big there. And Jonathan Mingo feels like he's been at Ole Miss for 10 years. He's leading them in receiving by a pretty wide margin, got a pretty good average catch number. And again, like he's their top guy at receiver, but he doesn't lead them in touchdown catches. They've got Malik Heath's got 2 and Michael Triggs got 3. They're pretty talented at receiver and in the backfield, and I think that should be enough to beat Georgia Tech. I think Georgia Tech's probably missing Jordan Dominic right now. They'd probably like to have pass rush.
Yeah, I've also got Ole Miss, and when I was reviewing my picks, I was kind of sketched out because I took the away team in almost all of them, but then you guys mentioning the Ole Miss fans don't have a far drive to go to get to that Georgia Tech game kind of makes me feel more comfortable. So I like Ole Miss by a reasonably large margin.
Ole Miss put 25,000 in TD Ameritrade Park back in June at the College World Series. I think they can fill up a football stadium that's even closer than that. Ole Miss, big. That's my thought. If they can figure out their quarterback, they're going to win big. I just don't think Georgia Tech is going to be able to stay on the field with them for very long. Georgia goes to South Carolina this week. Kind of an interesting that South Carolina has beaten one number 1 ranked team in its school history. Shane Beamer was on the sideline of the winning team that day. Kirby Smart was on the sideline of the losing team that day. It was Alabama in 2010 in Columbia. I don't think it's going to go that way this time, Tom.
Andrew, another road team. When I go back and think this through, the one I want to change is Mississippi State at LSU. That is a lot of road picks. But this one, I'm not going to change my mind. I liked how plucky South Carolina played last week. In fact, I think Arkansas has gotten good challenges from both Cincinnati and South Carolina that the strength of schedule is going to bode well for them later. However, Georgia seems to be a pretty complete team. Spencer Rattler, I don't think is going to have near the opportunities with underneath stuff than he did against Arkansas last week, and I think Georgia hangs on and wins by at least a couple touchdowns, possibly up to 3 or more.
Did you guys notice that low-key joke, plucky South Carolina, Scotty?
Yeah, got that one. That was good. I've got Georgia big, probably 2 or 3 scores, maybe more if they, throw a special teams or defensive touchdown in there. I think Arkansas last week exposed some, chinks in the armor for South Carolina, especially on the defensive side of the ball. Arkansas just was able to lean on South Carolina in that first half. Georgia should be able to do the same thing, maybe for longer. I don't think it'll be close. Stetson Bennett he'll probably have a pretty short day.
Yeah, I took Georgia, and maybe South Carolina's home field advantage can help them stay within 20 or something, but I don't think it's going to be close.
I think Georgia might be clearing Williams-Brice Stadium out by about halftime. I think they're going to take care of this one in a big way. Probably the most intriguing game in the SEC this week, Miami's at Texas A&M. A&M able to stay in the rankings, although they lost to Appalachian State last week. Miami up to number 13. The Aggies are number 24. This was probably going to be the game of the week in college football, if not for the way that Appalachian State kind of run things last week. Still a big game, though. A&M obviously has got a lot that it could still play for. Playoff, I guess, is still on the table, although it seems unlikely the way they played the first couple of weeks. Tom, what do you think? How do you think this one goes?
If I understood this right, ESPN Game Day was going to be there. Possibly a College Game Day was going to be there. And the loss nixed that.
And they went to App State instead.
Wow, what a slap in the face. They looked pitiful offensively last week. Haynes King's numbers did not look good. And Jimbo's supposed to be a quarterback whisperer and an offensive guru, and for them to run 38 offensive plays was just frankly embarrassing. However, having said all that, I think they're going to have a good game plan for Miami. And Andrew, yet another road team that could win, but not this time for me. I just, for no other reason than gut instinct, I picked A&M to win the game.
Yeah, I'm kind of going against the eye test this week. I've got Texas A&M bouncing back. I read on Twitter earlier, Billy Luigi, who covers A&M for Texags, he kind of broke the news that Max Johnson's going to start for A&M at quarterback instead of Haynes King. I think he's probably the safer, more game manager type quarterback that maybe A&M needs right now to get a little bit more stability on offense. They ran like fewer than 40 plays on offense last week. That's just I honestly couldn't believe it when I looked at the box score. Just the total low volume of plays that were run just because App State controlled the ball. I think Max Johnson probably gives A&M a little bit more of an opportunity to hold on to the ball, maybe eat up some more clock and just be a little bit safer in the passing game. They've got to get something going offensively, or they're going to be in for a long season, possibly a 1-5 start.
Yeah, this game, when I initially made my picks, I took Miami, but then again, they were the away team, and I couldn't take all the away teams this week, so I panicked and I switched it over to Texas A&M, largely because they're at home, and I don't think that they can get embarrassed 2 weeks in a row at home unless they want to have Jimbo's head on a stick. But I mean, they just should not struggle as much as they did last week with all the talent that they've recruited in. I don't see them having a dud 2 weeks in a row.
If you guys have time this week, you should go listen to the Field of 12 podcast that Clint Sterner was on. They were talking about Jimbo Fisher. He pretty much laid it down on Jimbo Fisher this week and just all the problems going on with A&M right now. It's a pretty interesting listen. Gives you a lot of insight into Jimbo and the quarterback position and the kind of the situation they have going there.
I took A&M for 2 reasons. Number one, I think A&M is further along in his program development than Miami is under Mario Cristobal. Just game 3 for him. Obviously a really fine coach that's come over from Oregon, and I think he'll be able to have a success at Miami that some of his predecessors weren't able to have. The home field advantage at Kyle Field, and it's going to be sold out on Saturday night. So it's not that people are jumping off the A&M bandwagon just too fast. They're going to be there and they're going to support them. for this game at Miami. It's an incredible home field advantage. There might not be another one in the country like it. I tell people all the time, I've been in a press box that swayed 3 times. One was the tornado at the Georgia Dome at the SEC tournament. One was the earthquake after the South Carolina game in 2011, and another one was during the Aggie War Hymn at Kyle Field. It is a freaky experience when you're there in College Station. They start doing that, and that press box is swaying back and forth. It's an intimidating environment, I would think, for the road team. I think A&M, because of home field advantage, if nothing else, beats Miami this week. Finally, Missouri State comes to Arkansas. Of course, like I said, it's kind of a top 10 matchup of sorts, but certainly you don't expect an FCS team to be able to compete with an SEC team head-to-head. It's going to take, I feel like, for Missouri State to be able to beat Arkansas, a sloppy game from the Razorbacks. Missouri State's going to have to hit some big passes over the top. Arkansas is going to have to commit turnovers, which the Razorbacks haven't done at this point. Tom, we all think Arkansas is going to win this, obviously. How close do you think Missouri State can stay?
When I touched on this game a little earlier, or this facet of the game, Arkansas has established what they want to be, and part of that is ball control and just hitting hard and all that, but another part is just being ball secure. I mean, their turnover margin right now, they've got 1 turnover. It was the KJ fumble, self-inflicted fumble against Cincinnati. So I think Missouri State will do things that cause Arkansas trouble. I think they're going to score, and I think Arkansas will pull away and probably right around near the betting line. I'm going to say 44-20.
Yeah, I'm kind of along those same lines. I think I put in a thread on our message board earlier this week. I think Arkansas can get up close to 50 points. I think I said 49-17. I think Missouri State, I think Jason Shelley and Jacardier Wright and potentially Ty Scott, might find the end zone. I just think Arkansas and their depth, even though they're thin in some positions, it's still much, much, much more than what Missouri State has, and it's better quality. I think Arkansas can probably lean on Missouri State the entire game if it wanted to. I think that they could probably rush for as many yards as they want. But I think this, like we said earlier, this is probably the week where you see KJ, get that arm warmed up a little bit, just as they head into what is undoubtedly the toughest stretch of their schedule.
Yeah, I don't think this one will be too close. I like Arkansas by at least 30.
It's interesting, you talked about the betting line. I've had trouble finding a consensus betting line. There's a lot of Vegas casinos that won't put FBS, FCS games on the board. And the betting lines that I've seen one at 24, I've seen one at 28. I saw one early in the week at 39. And so I guess maybe that tells you why they won't put them on the board, because it's really difficult to find a consensus. I think it might be a little bit closer than people expect, for the simple reason that Arkansas, I think, is just going to try to run the ball. And when you do that, obviously it eliminates the number of opportunities that you have to score points. I would be surprised if you see Arkansas go into a lot of 2-minute situations offensively, trying to get points in this game. It just feels like it's going to be a repeat, probably game plan wise offensively, of what they did against South Carolina, like Scotty said, where it's the first 4 possessions of the game. I think Arkansas had close to around 15 minutes time of possession, and they scored touchdowns in all 3. And so I think it's going to be that kind of game where maybe there aren't as many opportunities to score for Arkansas. It's going to take some big plays, I think, on one side or the other, maybe for Arkansas to be able to widen that margin by a good bit. 39-point spread, I don't see that happening in this game. Maybe 24, I could see that a little bit, but I think Arkansas is going to win this game comfortably, probably by 3 or more scores. Again, Arkansas and Missouri State on Saturday night. It's a 6 o'clock kickoff. The game's not going to be televised, by the way. It's going to be streamed on ESPN Plus and SEC Network Plus. If you've got questions about that, visit our site, wholehogsports.com. We've got a story up right now that kind of explains that and has a tutorial about how you can go through and find this game on the ESPN streaming platform Saturday night. And I've heard a lot of people say, how can Arkansas be disrespected? They're the number 110 team, yada, yada, yada. Hey, look, every SEC team has to stream a game this year. It's part of the new SEC ESPN agreement. This actually began last year. Arkansas chose Missouri State way before they were a top 10 team. This was a decision made back in the spring sometime that Arkansas and Missouri State would be a streaming only game. It basically came down between this game and Liberty. Arkansas said we'd rather have Liberty on a television network. So Arkansas and Missouri State, it's a stream only Saturday night, 6 o'clock kickoff. Come to wholehogsports.com before, during, after the game. You can find all of our coverage there on the Razorbacks and the Bears. For Tom Murphy and Scotty Bordelon and Andrew Joseph, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
The proceeding has been a production of WholeHogSports.com. Look for our latest podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at WholeHogSports.com for the latest news and commentary.